3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Mission Control for another feature-focused video. In this video, we're going to talk about options for a queue list. To set options for a queue list, press the Options hard key or Options from the soft keys, and then press the Select button of the playback to be edited. The Options window will open, allowing you to set a wide range of options for how the playback will work, including times. You can also set the options using the soft keys. The options are split into different categories using the tabs down the left-hand side. Click the I button for a help window on each setting. These options are covered in this video are for a queue list, for normal queues, and for chases. The options are different and are described in the queue video and the chases video. So here, I've got version 14 on the Titan Go interface. And to start optioning our queues, we can either press the Options hard key or the Options key on our console or on the soft keys. Then if we wanted to edit multiple ones, we could select them all, and we could edit for all these queue lists at the same time, or just one. Blind, it says individual playback to blind mode. The playback will then output only to the visualizer, not to the stage. This can be useful if you need to program and test a queue during a live show. Crossfade HTTP, if on, makes HTTP dimmer in Titan. Channels in this queue override other HTTP channels, obeying the priority settings. So if we had a playback that had our dimmers at 100%, and we wanted them to come in at 50% in the second fired playback, if the crossfade HTTP was set on the second playback, the dimmers would dim down to 50% to obey the crossfade HTTP. Queue links disabled. If set, all links between all queues are ignored when the queue is fired. Loop action sets what will happen at the end of a queue list. Stop on final queue. The queue will stop advancing once it reaches the last queue. The queue list will go back to the first queue after the last if Move in Dark is enabled. This will also loop. Move in Dark. Move in Dark will preload LTP values on each fixture where there is no output in the preceding queues. Off. Move in Dark can be set on a per queue basis. Disabled. Will disable Move in Dark across the list regardless of queue settings. Early. The LTP values will preload in the earliest possible queue. Late. The LTP values will preload in the latest possible queue. So let's take a look at some of that. So here we can see we can set our blind and our crossfade HTTP. If our queue links disabled, we can have it change it from having any that are link with previous or link after previous and turn them off as a whole. Here we can set our loop action to either loop or stop on final queue. Default is loop, so if we click it on stop on final queue and we close here and we fire up our queue list and we hit go, and we'll just bump through our queues kind of quickly here. When we get to Q10, when I hit go again, it does not loop around to Q1 as it would normally do by default. If we turn loop back on and release it, now when we fire it again and we get through it, I see that it loops back around to Q1. Move in Dark, again, we can turn it off, so then it will be on a per queue basis. We can disable it for the queue list as a whole. We can set it to early or late for the queue list as a whole. Move in Dark is basically have your fixtures preset in position, colors, and gobos while they have no output, so they will be ready to come up in the new positions in your queue list rather than sweeping across the stage. Continuing on, priority allows you to figure out how playbacks will behave if you turn on two playbacks controlling the same fixture. You must refire for this to take effect. So if you have it up and change your priority until you bring the fader down and refire it, the priority will not change. Run on startup sets the playback to run when the console is powered on or the show file loads. This is be disabled in the auto run startup playbacks option in user settings. It is turned on by default. Shape tracking defines how shapes are tracked in a queue list. Off, no shapes are tracked. On, all shapes are tracked. Local follows a local queue list tracking option. Timecode source changes where this playback gets the timecode from. Each playback can listen to a different timecode input. Tracking disable or enable tracking default across the entire queue list. This value can be overridden on a per queue basis. So let's take a look at some of that. So here, I've got a couple queue lists. If we fire this queue list, we see that it has conventionals as well as the rest of our movers in it. And if I fire this one, see it has all the movers but none of our conventionals. So if we were to go into options for here, so we can see here on priority, we got low, normal, high, programmer, and very high. If we set to very high, even starter changes we try to make in the programmer, two fixtures that were in this playback would not be able to be done. But we'll go and set it to high. and exit here. So now if we have this playback running and we now fire this playback and we hit go, and then we hit go on this one, we can see that our fixtures change with it. But if we hit go on this one, our fixtures don't change, but our conventionals stay up because they were not in this playback. But the rest of the movers cannot be changed by this playback because they are taken over by priority here. Run a startup again. If we wanted it to run a startup, say that we had a queue list that we needed to fire when the console was powered on and the show file would load, you can set it here. Shape tracking, we can set between off, on, and local. So if we had some shapes in our playback, we could either have it automatically track those shapes by being on, we can have it not tracking shapes by having it off, or set it to local and follow whatever we set in those particular shapes. So if we take a look at that, we see here in our shapes, we've got a circle shape in Q2, and it doesn't track into the rest of them because we had it off. If we bring up our options again, if we turn it to on, we see that now it tracks through on all of them. And if we set it to local, we could turn it off in this queue but leave it on in this one, or turn it off in this one, it would automatically be off in this one. Timecode, we could tell it to listen to a particular timecode. If we wanted to, have listened to timecode 1, 2, 3, or 4. In tracking, we can turn off tracking in our queue list as a whole. Continuing on to the Handles tab. Handle paging allows you to lock the playback on the handle so that it will always appear on the handle no matter what page is selected. This is useful if you have some general playbacks you want on every page without having to copy the playback onto each page. Unlocked, the playback will change with the pages as normal. Transparent lock, the playback will appear on all pages when the handle is unprogrammed. Locked, this playback will appear on all pages. Playbacks programmed on this handle on other pages will not be accessible. And key profile allows us to set the key profile individually for this playback. Global sets the key profile back to the global settings for playbacks. So let's take a look at that. So if I was to take this queue list here, and if I was to set it to locked, and we close our window here. So now no matter what page I change to, we see that queue list 23 stays on fader 8. If I was to change it to transparent lock, we see that if we go to page 3, since I have something programmed here, it switches to dip. When I go to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, it stays there because there's nothing else programmed there. Same thing if I go the opposite direction. If I have something programmed on page 1 on that fader, it changes to that, but goes back to it on an empty page. For key profile, if we click it here, we can change it to either add a new one or pick from an existing one to change how our keys will be controlled. Continuing on to the Times tab, and here we have flash fade in and flash fade out. It is used to flash fade in the playback or flash fade out the playback, but must be used with the timed flash key profile speed. The default speed for this playback in BPM is to be overridden by a Brate or BPM master. As you see here, we can set those to either be whatever time we wanted them to be for these two, or change our BPM here. So say instead of being 60, we can change it to be 20. Continuing on to the fader tab, queue list fader mode specifies the behavior of the fader on a queue list. Kill with off, fader controls intensity. To kill the queue list, it must be released or killed. Kill at 0. When the fader reaches 0, the queue list is killed. Crossfade, the queue list proceeds by raising and lowering the fader to fade between queues. Fire first queue. When enabled, the queue list will fire its first queue when it is activated. So let's take a look at some of that. So if we have our changes to intensity kill at 0, and go ahead and close here. When we fire our queue list and hit go, we can see that it steps through our queue lists, but when we bring our fader down, it automatically kills the queue list. If we had it set to manual crossfade, we can see when we bring our fader up, as we bring it up to our first one, it fades into it. When we bring it down, it fades into our second queue, fade it back up into our third, back down to our fourth, and so forth, and on until it goes through our queue lists. If we change it back to intensity kill with off or intensity kill at 0, and we turn on fire first queue, And we'll just double tap release real quick and exit. So now when we bring this cue list up, we can see that it automatically fires the first cue for us and waits for us to hit go to the next second cue, third, fourth, and so on. Under the Effects tab, we have the Effect Speed Multiplier, a multiplier for the speed of effects in this playback. This is applied in addition to BPM masters and other modifiers. Shape and Effect Speed sets whether the fader position affects the speed of shapes in this playback. Shape Behavior controls the behavior of keyframe shapes in this playback. Global uses global settings from user settings. Overlay, shape continues to run over changes to attributes. LTP, if attributes are changed, the shape will stop running on those attributes. Shape size, that's where the fader position affects the size of shapes in this playback. Fixed, no effect. Fader, the size of the fader, the size of all types of shape are set by the fader position. HDP fader, only dimmer shapes are controlled by the fader position. Size source allows you to allocate a size master to this playback. Speed source allows you to allocate a rate or BPM master to this playback. So let's take a look at some of that. Here, I've got the options for this playback up. And if we bring it up so we can see it, we can see that we've got a shape running on our Beam 150s. And here's just some intensity for our B150, so as we play with our fader, it doesn't change. We see here to start with, we've got our effector speed multiplier. If we put a multiplier in here, we can change the speed. So if we were to click it, we can change it to, let's say, 200. And now we see that our shape runs twice as fast as it was. Once we turn it back to default. Shape and effect speed, either fixed or on fader. If we click it to on fader, we can change it so now that as we bring the fader down, we'll see that our shape slows down. And as we bring it back up, it speeds back up. Shape behavior for keyframe shapes, global, overlay, or LTP. For this one, please see our video on standard cues. Shape size, either fixed fader or HTP fader. And if we click it to fader, we see as we bring the fader down, our shape will become smaller. And as we pick it back up, it'll get larger again. If we had a dimmer effect, we do the same thing, but for a dimmer effect. Size source. If we had a size master that we wanted to assign to this playback, we can simply click it and set which one we wanted. Same thing with the speed source. How we set it to be any of our rate or BPM masters. Under the Release tab, we have Key Release. After each step, fixtures that are no longer affected are released. Release Mask lets you specify which attributes were released to the state they were in when previously fired playback. When this playback is killed, you lower the fader to 0. You can also use the Attribute Pink buttons to set the mask. The mask can be either set to global or local. Local means you can make individual mask settings for this playback. Global uses the Global Release Mask, which is set in the Release menu. Press the Release key. Release time sets the release fade time for this playback. Entering a playing time or return to the global. Global release setting time is set in user settings. By default, that is 2 seconds. So let's take a look at some of that. So here we set the options for this particular cue list, and we turn on cue release on, and then close out here. And we're going to fire this playback to help make things a little obvious. Then we bring this playback up, and when we hit go, we can see our fixtures move. This position. When we hit go, the next cue doesn't contain any of the movers, so if we hit go, we can see they all release back to this playback. If we hit go again, just the BMFLs move to our lead singer position in this color. When we hit go again, they'll go back to being a release state because they are not in the fourth cue at all. And they go back to just doing what's here, and then we continue on through the loop. For here, we'll talk about release mask. Release mask can be either set to global or local. And we can set our time here to, again, the default is 2 seconds. So let's see how that can work for us. If we bring up this playback here, we see that it has some positions, some colors, and some gobos in our fixtures. And bring up this key list, and when we hit go, we'll see that that changes. When we hit go, keep going back. But if I was to turn off this playlist, even though it is killed, you can see that our colors are still from what they were last here, and not what they were on this playback. If you wanted to go back automatically, what you do is you go ahead and set the options for this cue list, and we'll go ahead and set our release mask to local, and we'll go ahead and include position, color, and gobo. So now if we exit out of here and we refire this playback to get back to our default look, now when we fire this cue list and we hit go, we go through our different cues. When we kill it now, it will release back to this playback here. Queue options. This allows you to set queue options on a per queue basis. This is the same as in the queue view. So let's take a look at that. If we're going to hit our options and go ahead and select this queue list, and we can see here we got queue options. If we click that, it's the same we get in our queue list view. We can go through, we can set our queue, select our queue number, set its curve, its link, its move and dark settings, its move and dark inhibit, tracking, its legend, notes, auto loads, macro links, and disable the queue. It's the same as if we were to do this here, and have all the same things here just through our options menu. So that has been editing your options for a queue list in version 14 of Titan. I hope you learned something. Please subscribe and join us next time. Thanks. Bye.
Wheel stop.
Roger, wheel stop, Discovery. Welcome back. A great ending to the new beginning.